This is Meg Flanigan, and in this second part of our series we're going to be thinking about how to design multiple choice questions that target our students' higher order thinking skills. So here we have our revised Bloom's taxonomy triangle. On the bottom levels we are showing our lower order thinking skills, and then moving up the triangle towards our higher order thinking skills or our critical thinking skills. And as you'll see, when we are designing multiple choice test questions, we can actually create questions that go all the way up to the level of evaluation. But if you're trying to have your students make something or have a finished product, then clearly multiple choice questions are not the best format for that. So always bearing in mind what it is that you're trying to get the students to be able to demonstrate, and then thinking about whether a multiple choice question is the best format for that. So we are actually going to talk about how to design test questions that target all skill levels. And you might wonder why I say that, because clearly we want our students to be excellent critical thinkers, and so we might be tempted to set exams that test and evaluate just those higher order thinking skills. But I'm actually going to try to persuade you not to do that. So why is that? Well, if you look at this triangle, what you can see is that the higher order thinking skills are all predicated on the fundamental lower order thinking skills. So for example, if I was to set a question about analysis, maybe analysing physiological or clinical data, then in order to do that, my students need to, first of all, remember their physiological facts. They have to be able to understand them. They have to know which of those facts is applicable in a particular situation. And then they are given a problem and they have to be able to analyse that, which is dependent on all the levels beneath, in order to answer the question. So if my student gets the analysis question correct, then that's great. Clearly, they can do all of these different levels. But if they get it wrong, what does that mean? Is it that just in the final analysis step they messed up in some way? Or could they not remember a basic fact? Or they did remember them, they did understand them, but they misapplied some? So if we want students to be able to identify where their learning needs are, then we are going to try to help them scaffold that in terms both of content and skill levels by writing tests and test questions that help them to do that. Now, it can be confusing when you write your questions, especially when you're starting off doing this. You start writing your question and then you think, is this really an analysis question or is this an application question? And of course, if it's an analysis question, there will be a feature of it that includes application. So it can be quite tricky initially to think in your head where you've set the different levels of questions. So I find this verb wheel to be particularly helpful, because obviously if I'm asking the students to analyse a particular problem, then indeed this is the level of analysis of Bloom's taxonomy. But it's also analysis if I'm asking the students to compare and contrast, to differentiate, etc. An evaluation question, I might be asking them to draw conclusions or to critique, etc. So when you're writing your questions and then when you're looking at your test as a whole and trying to see if you have a balance of questions at the various levels of Bloom's, it can be very helpful to just sit with this wheel and keep it next to you.